Hi, this is Jeff from Site Subscribe. I just wanted to give you a brief introduction on how to use the web inspector tools inside of your browser to inspect and ultimately to edit your CSS styles for your website, and even how to investigate the HTML structure of your website. So the first thing you want to do is go to your browser. I'm using Firefox. All the browsers are going to have some different tools that are available. They're very similar. You can also, if they don't have built-in tools, you can add a plug-in to most of the browsers called Firebug that will give you the same functionality. Inside of Firefox and other browsers, you can go into usually like the tools section, and you can go into the web developer menu or similar and look for something that looks like inspector, and it opens up a section below your web page which shows you the HTML of your page. And what I like about Firefox that for instance Chrome doesn't do offhand is it already opens up in the mode where you can start hovering over and highlighting elements on the page, and as you do that, the different elements are already available without having to click any other buttons, just by beginning to hover. Within Chrome, you have to go ahead and select something, and then you get into this mode. So this is a little bit quicker. So anyway, you can click on an element, and it shows you the HTML structure on the left and the CSS on the right sidebar there. As an example, for a shortcut to get to this section, you can hit Control. On the PC it's Control Alt I, and on the Mac it's Alt Command I, and it opens and closes that window. So it's the same across most of the browsers, like Chrome, Firefox, and Safari support that. And here's the Chrome browser. As you notice, as I open it up and I hover my mouse, it's not going to give me the element highlighting without having to go ahead and click on this little magnifying glass, and now I can hover over like I could in Firefox. They both work the same way. Once you highlight an element and click it, you get the HTML section highlighted over here of the actual element, and you get the CSS definition and selectors on the right. With both Firefox and Safari, generally you can, once you've selected an item, you can actually edit the with Firefox, Chrome, and Safari, you can edit the different properties of the style sheet kind of live, and it's non-destructive. So for instance, if I want to go ahead and change the color, I can just make it red. Notice right now the color red isn't accepting that. It's being crossed out. So that means there's something else taking precedence, another selector taking precedence over that. So I can go and find that other selector and maybe deselect some of these things in here until I get what I want, just to see what it looks like on the screen. Or another option is I can, usually by adding the important with the exclamation mark important after the selector, that normally is enough to force the override to give this selection property precedence over the others. So there you can see kind of live before your eyes the different effects of messing around with your CSS. You can change position, change your margin. I can make it, again, it's not taking margin without adding the important selector because there's another setting already overriding this. So, that's maybe something I don't want to have, so I can just deselect it. And everything you do here is non-destructive, so you can experiment with the look and feel of your website, playing around with the different styles. You can go to different elements and different, for instance, different tags. Like here's an H3 tag, and you can see whether the element selector, if it's very broad, in this case it's the ID content with an H3 tag inside of it. So it's kind of broad. It's not as broad as all H3 tags. So if you look down here, all H2, H3, H4 tags, they all have some settings. They're being overridden because they're pretty broad. They're being overridden by a narrower definition that is not as broad as just an H3 tag. In this case, it's H3 tag inside of a content ID. So that's going to take precedence because it's more narrow. And if you wanted to be really narrow, you could, and you want to override that particular tag, you can either give that tag another unique class within your HTML, or you can, in your CSS file, you can actually do something even more specific. You know, the content H3 is going to look something like that. Maybe you can give it another, color, give it a hex color or something. One more. Nope. Is that enough? Yeah, either way. So you have, that's kind of maybe one way you can save that to your style sheet, and you can have your settings overriding the existing theme of your website. The style sheets come with your theme. And there's another video that we've done that describes how to save this style sheet back and overriding your theme. I don't want to get into that level right now, but once you have your style selector, you may need to go even narrower to make it override that particular selector that's already existing in there. There's already a color setting, and maybe this one is going to take precedence. Things that define the precedence are the narrow or broadness of the selector. So how specific are you, the specificity, how specific are you being within your designator here, your selectors? If you want to be more specific, you could say inside of, the body class on the page that has a single class, and that's even a little more specific, but that still may not be enough to override this selector. So you might need to look at what is the parent element of this selector inside of your HTML structure here, and maybe you want to identify some other div above this, something like entry content or something like that. So you could be, actually it's the other way around, it's content, then it's class of entry content. So that's actually much more specific, and maybe I want to get rid of this first part. So that's a much more specific designator to try to zero in on this particular element, which the purpose of doing that is to give precedence to your call out of your definition here of your CSS styles, to be able to override those that are already in your different style sheets from your theme, etc. Another way to do that is the other thing that takes precedence is actually the order of events, the order of the styles inside of your style sheet, and how the style sheets load. For instance, your theme styles typically are going to load first, and then some plugin styles, and then you want to override those with your actual CSS file that you're going to be using, and have that load last, or near to last, so that it takes precedence over the theme and the other plugin styles. And I'm actually using a plugin to allow us to copy and paste our CSS into somewhere within inside of the WordPress dashboard. We're using the Catalyst theme, and inside of there we have an advanced options tab where we can actually paste custom CSS, and so we don't have to worry about the precedence of the files being loaded. In this case, we click on custom CSS and we paste our CSS in there, What we do have to worry about is make sure we don't overwrite someone else's CSS that they've pasted in there. And I actually have another video that helps us get around overwriting somebody else's work by mistake. But what is important though is this file is loading the CSS later in the sequence, so that the precedence occurs that it will override your CSS that you put in there, will override other plugin and theme CSS unless the selectors are so narrow or given a designator of important. For instance, if we look at some CSS here that's color coded here with syntax, you'll notice that a lot of these important designators, and that just means that they're trying to force an override of a particular style, and sometimes you have to put important on there to override what's already been given as a style from another plugin or another theme or something like that. So we just have to use some logic here that use the least amount of information that you can get away with. Sometimes just using like entry content, something like that, entry content would be enough. And then sometimes you might need to go drill in more with a longer designator. Sometimes you might need to use the important designator on top of that. So don't try not to use important unless you absolutely have to. And the way to do it is you can test it by going into your website inspector here inside your browser, and you can add a color designator and just see if it takes it. And it did take it, and it makes the effect right there. So it did take it without adding the important, but the reason it did is because when you add it in the top section here, just called element, it puts the style in line inside of the tag, which gives it another precedence order. So that's kind of like cheating. So that's not how, if we add it to a style sheet here, that's not how it's going to be represented. So you'd really need to type it in here. What I would like to do is maybe copy that to the clipboard just so you have that setting. Type over that with another setting, and you can just see if it's going to take it. If it doesn't take it, then you can put in the important designator. As an example, like we did earlier, you could play around with the margin settings, and you could say it, make it an M setting, and it actually took it without adding important. A lot of times if you're going to play with margin, you have to use the important designator or use a more specific call out on your CSS. So that just gives you an idea how you can drill into your style sheet, kind of real time, play around with the settings, and then when you're done with your settings the way you want them, you can grab that, copy those selectors to those parameters to the clipboard, come back in here, paste them in, and try to retain your formatting so it's all good and consistent with the rest of your style sheet, and then save that. In our case, we'd be pasting it back into the particular CSS location here. In some cases, just saving and re-uploading your style sheet will do the job as well. But the point is, you're doing non-destructive changes while you're playing around with the web inspector in your browser. You're getting the designator specificity that you might need. You might have to even upload your style sheet with this specificity, and then come back to your web page, do a refresh, and see if it took. If it didn't, you might have to do either more specificity or use the important designator, or maybe in the worst case scenario, you may even have to go into your page editor and add a tag, like a class to that H3 tag or something like that, if you just can't seem to get it any other way. But there's a lot of ways. That's like worst case. You really don't want to do that if you don't have to. You want to try to use broader strokes to try to achieve what you need, and then zero in as needed. And because it's going to just create less headaches for you later to adjust those. So for instance, again, if you want to go into Chrome, you would do the same thing. Go into Safari, it's just about the same way. Or if you go into Internet Explorer, you want to install the Firebug extension. And once you get into these sections, you can click around on your elements. You can override the settings. You can add additional settings. You know, background color. You know, make it pink. You know, and you may have to add important, and it all depends on what you're looking at, whether it's really going to take or not. So you may have to go into some other settings. Actually, and then I find some bugs with Chrome where you notice I added that and it didn't save it. That's why I tend to fall back to Firefox. Because here, if I'm in Firefox and I want to select like this content background, and I want to edit the color, it will edit it and it'll kind of keep it where Chrome forgets it, and it's just harder to work with. So I tend to work in Firefox the most these days because of that, and I'm not sure why Chrome is forgetting my settings. Like if I'm trying to add a designator, it doesn't retain it. It puts it up at the top, and it's just not retaining it. So it works half the time, not even half the time. So I end up coming down into Firefox and adding new designators by clicking into the parameter of the last style, hitting the tab key, and you can just start typing your style. What Chrome does do that Firefox doesn't do is as you begin typing your style, it will know kind of what you're looking for. It starts bringing up a kind of a intuitive menu here to select from. But then, like I said, it's forgetting. As I hit return, it forgets it. It's not saving it, so it's not working too well. But I could do it here, and I could say text align. As long as you remember what it is and how to spell it. Yeah, I just made all my text centered on the page, which looks really weird. So I can undo it by unchecking it, or just don't save this style to my style sheet, and I'll be good. So there's a lot of different things you can do. That's how, just kind of a brief overview of how you can use the web inspector, and there's tons of available information on that on the internet. Just Google it, YouTube it. There's tons of stuff. If you want to look up Firebug, they all work kind of like Firebug, so you can look up tutorials on Firebug, and that give you a little more information. But one of the main keys, though, is to remember when you're done getting the style the way you want it, just assuming that's what you want. One thing you need to do is make sure that when you grab the selector and you're going to save that style back, don't override, don't just add it to the bottom, and try not to duplicate existing content in your style sheet. So the first thing you want to do is, before you save the style with all this back in your style sheet, grab the selector, do a search on that in your style sheet, in your existing style sheet. So here's my actual style sheet. I'm going to do a search. I'm going to copy paste that into my search field, and it's coming up with nothing. If I was looking for, let's say I'm looking for this style, I would find that inside of my style sheet in a place where it's being used. Might have to look for all places it's being used, but try to find one that's maybe a broad instance of it, not a specific page, class, or something like that. Find a broad use of it, and from that location you might be able to edit the style and add to it, and just add the thing that you changed and grab that and paste it into the bottom of your style. Or like if I made this background color transparent as an example, see it's actually being crossed out because it doesn't have precedence. So if I want to force it, I can add the important designator, and hopefully that's enough, but it's not enough in this case unless I misspelled it. Yeah, it's just not taking it. So that's something you'd have to play with as far as making that one work. You'd have to do some experimenting. But for example, if this was a setting I had just changed and I want to grab that and paste it in to my style sheet, put it kind of towards the bottom, make sure there isn't already a padding setting in here. There's a padding setting right there. Okay, this isn't the real designator I was playing with, but just as this example. So instead of putting it in there twice, you would replace just the parameters here with the parameters that are up here, and then get rid of this extra line. Or if you're really sure about that it's not being used in the sense of specificity that you want to use, you can add that designator to the bottom of your page. Grab just the part that you're changing. I think it was the text align center that I changed, and just save that back to your website style sheet with just the designator and just the part that you changed. There's no need to grab all this other stuff and put it inside of your style sheet, because it's already being added by something else. That's why it's there. It's either being added by your theme, and you can look over here and see it's being added by something in the theme in this case, or you might see another style sheet linked over here. Most of the browsers will show you where the other CSS designators are coming from, and you can hover over that link usually and see that it's a theme. In this case, it's an external style sheet being loaded. In this case, it's a theme style sheet being loaded. So you can kind of see where those are coming from. And so there's a lot of things to remember, and it gets complicated, but there's a lot to learn regarding how to use those inspectors. But the main thing is you can do some simple changes by accessing your inspector with a Alt-Command-I or Alt-Control-I. Open that up, check out your HTML. If you want to look at the source of an image, you click on that little icon, click on the image, and you can see instantly the source, the URL, the name, the size of the file. So it's really a handy tool to use for a lot of different reasons. So go ahead and check it out on the internet, do some more research, and you'll be on your way. Alright, that's it. This is Jeff from Site Subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.